This is exercise 10.1a, using geometric constraints. I'm in the Constraint Practice drawing file in the Steps Lesson 10 folder. We'll begin before I establish any constraints by simply moving one of the lines to see what happens. I'll use my grips. Notice that the ends come apart and the lines are separate. Let me undo that. And then we'll set some constraints. We'll start with some coincident constraints. I'll pick the coincident constraint command and I'll select a couple of points. Okay. Repeat the command. Notice that I go all the way back to the beginning. I have to enter to accept the coincident constraint, like so. I'll repeat it for the other corners. Like so. Now, if I go to move the same line as I did once before, notice that the lines remain attached. As I move the one line, AutoCAD automatically stretches the other lines to maintain that connection. Okay, we'll escape out of that. Now let's create a perpendicular constraint. I'll go back to my coincident constraint, hold the button down so that I have a flyout, and I'll pick a perpendicular constraint. And in this case, I want to make this line perpendicular to this line. AutoCAD gives me an icon telling me that that's what's happened. Now, if I go to move my line, everything remains attached, but that corner remains a perpendicular right angle corner, no matter how I move my line. Now let's create some parallel constraints. We'll constrain the top and the bottom and the left and the right. Hold down my button and pick the parallel constraint. I want this line to be parallel to this line. Good. Repeat the command and the parallel option. And let's let this line be parallel to this line. Very well. Now, as I go to move my line around, you'll see that I actually have a rectangle and it's going to remain a rectangle. Finally, let's make one of our lines horizontal. I'll pick the horizontal constraint and I will make the top line horizontal. You'll see now that my entire object is constrained as a rectangle which is horizontal to the ground. Now let's thaw the circle layer. And see that AutoCAD displays a circle for me. We'll create a coincident constraint between the center of the circle and the bottom corner here. Coincident constraint. Between here and the center of that circle. Now you'll notice that as I move my lines, the circle remains attached to that lower left corner. Let's copy our circle. I'm going to use grips and I will say copy, and I want to go about 6 inches in this direction, like so. Now we'll create a symmetric constraint between our two circles. AutoCAD starts by asking me to select my first object. Select this object, my second object here, and then a symmetry line, and we'll make that our symmetry line. AutoCAD has now made these two circles symmetrical about this line. Notice that as I move the line now, AutoCAD will adjust the distance between the circles so that they remain symmetrical about my symmetrical line. To delete a constraint, simply right-click on the constraint and select Delete. My circles are no longer symmetrical.